Welcome to another episode of Band Director Bootcamp, the podcast with productivity and wellness tips for busy band directors. I'm your host, Lesley Moffat, and I'm really grateful to be sharing this platform with you. As busy band directors, we know you don't have a lot of time to sit and watch lengthy professional development webinars, so we share 20-minute tidbits with takeaways you can use to support you with professional longevity and a healthier life. And today I have a guest named Ronald Kearns. Ronald's a retired teacher, music teacher, highly respected music educator, performer, clinician, and I hunted him down because I learned he's the author of 4 books, The Quick Reference for Band Directors, and also The Quick Reference for Band Directors Who Teach Orchestra, who teach jazz, separate books, and also recording tips for music educators. So it's got lots of different stuff that he's covered specifically to help music educators do their jobs. And he's going to share some secrets that he learned throughout his career that have helped him build a successful music programs, and he's going to share some specific strategies you can implement immediately so that you can help create a successful program where you are. Your successful program might look different from somebody else's successful program, but whatever it is, what do you need to do to define that, and how do you take the steps to get there, and how do you do that? So Ronald Kearns, thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Hey, give us a little bit of your background, just so we get to know who you are a little bit before we dive in to talk about your books.
Okay. Well, before I got training as a band director in college, I started off as a band director, as a drum major for my band. And that hooked me on the thought of becoming a band director. And I did my undergraduate work at Knoxville College in Knoxville, Tennessee, and my graduate work at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. And from that point on, I have done several different things in postgraduate work. But those two schools basically gave me my main resources.
Tell me a little bit about your teaching. What kind of teaching you've done? Some of your experience.
Well, in Maryland, in most of the schools in Maryland, when you're a band director, you have to teach band, orchestra, and jazz, as well as marching band. And so because of my experiences with those groups, I found the need to keep a journal of the different things that worked as a band director, as an orchestra director, as a jazz director, and what had to be done as a marching band director. And so because of those many hats, I was aware that there are people who are probably not good at all of those things and need some resources for those things. And so after I retired, I decided to use my journals and those things that I'd had for my own self to provide resources for music educators and band directors.
So let's talk about then some of the things that you use in your book to build successful programs. What are some of those things that are behind the scenes before you get on that podium that you teach or that you talk about in the book, because you know that that's part of the foundation of building your programs?
Well, most band directors don't realize that conducting the band and doing the musical part is a very small part of what we as band directors do. I always talk about, and I address in the books, that we are managers, we're counselors, we are musicians. We are, in some cases, the only musician that most of our students will see. And then, of course, the component of being an educator and all the things that we have to know about being an educator, doing lesson plans, filling out forms, and taking care of things that aren't related to music specifically, but have to be adapted to music because we have to use those things for our resources in order to be successful.
And those aren't the things that are covered in or undergrad work, are they?
Well, one of the things that every reader of each of my books will discover is that I say that most college education, music education programs woefully unprepare students to be band directors because they only focus on the music aspects. And the problem is you get out and you find out that you've got to book buses, you've got to have health forms, you've got to have plans for teaching, you have to have all these other things that aren't necessarily things that you think of when you go into the field. And so since my books are being used as textbooks, I want the students to realize that they have so many other things that they have to do besides getting up on the podium and conducting the groups.
Yeah, that actually, when my first couple of years of teaching, I was taking notes like you had a journal that was like, these are things they never taught me. I didn't know what a purchase order was. I didn't know budgeting. What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
I knew what a Neapolitan sixth chord was, but I've never needed that information. Yeah, it was pretty, and it was hard to get out there and try to figure all of that stuff out. And so, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned budgeting, and each of my 4 books has a section, a chapter that is devoted to developing a budget for that particular group, whether it's the band, whether it's the orchestra, whether it's the jazz group, and even the marching band. You have to have resources, and so therefore you have to have fundraisers, you have to have parent boosters that are willing to give you some assistance and how to be able to do things like that. Because if you have a seamstress in your band boosters club, then when you have to have uniforms or different things that you want to wear for marching band or for jazz band or orchestra or band, you can tap into that resource to have them make some of those things for you, and it saves money, and it helps you use other budgeted items more effectively, because you don't have to spend a whole lot of money on getting certain things that you can have made.
Yeah. But you have to be organized enough to know these things, know who your people are. As a band director, you're really the director of a program. You're like the CEO and the CFO, right? And you have to market. You have to market your program to the current students, to upcoming students, out to your community, because you're going to ask them for help. And there are so many layers. If you have the best band in the world, but nobody ever sees or hears them, that's great, because that's all that's really matters, right, is what you're giving them in the classroom, of course. But if you want to take them beyond and do those things, that's where I felt woefully unprepared. My dad was a band director, luckily, and I had 1-800-DAD when I was first starting out and couldn't figure a lot of this out. So talk to us about maybe some specific things that you address in your book on, let's say you're a band director who's teaching orchestra. What would be something that you might have in that book that would be helpful?
Well, I talk about the things that both band and orchestra directors have to do. And so when I'm talking about the implementation of lesson plans or doing things to get the band started or get the orchestra started, I want the band director to know that they may not be familiar with orchestral things, but they are familiar with enough music things and enough management things that they can adapt those things to doing orchestra. And I emphasize the importance of being able to develop the language and know the terminology for orchestra and the differences between the terminology used in orchestra from band. But that once you start to do that, and once you learn the importance of bowing and how bowing is very similar to air production for band instruments, then you can make that connection and you can start paying attention to why getting a full string vibration sound is important for orchestras. Because one of the worst things that happens is band directors don't pay attention to the orchestral string sound. And so they are more interested in hearing the note, but not hearing the fullness and the full production of sound that good orchestras get. And so I say in the book that it's best to go from the familiar to the unfamiliar than to just try to address the unfamiliar, because there's nothing you're going to get from addressing the unfamiliar. You have to use your own skills and things that you've already learned in preparation to be a band director or to be a band student to understand what you're trying to do to get the orchestral students to be successful.
Yeah, that really bridges that gap. I got out of college. I got waived out of the college string class because it met at the same time jazz band did. So I was in jazz band. So I just took 1 semester of private violin lessons from a woman that didn't speak English. So I have no idea what I didn't learn very much. And then my first job, of course, I had orchestra. And I was like, oh, well, there I am trying to tune the instruments. And I was like, something's wrong with all these instruments. The strings kept breaking. And then finally someone told me that the violas are not tuned the same as the violins. I mean, that's where I was.
Right.
This was long before the internet. I mean, I was flailing. I was terrified. So I needed your book back in the 1980s.
and that's one of the things I talk about in the book, why you need to be able to have a resource that you can go to. And that's why I called the 3 quick references, because I want the director to be able to quickly look at a chapter and see, oh, that's that thing I'm having a problem with, and go to that chapter and see how they can address that issue or what they can do to get beyond it. Because the first thing that happens when you find out, and I had a similar experience as yours, you're overwhelmed. The thing is, I wanted to be a band director. I was trained as a band director, and now I've got to teach orchestra. And actually the first chapter of the teaching orchestra book says, I was a band director and now I have to teach orchestra. What do I do? And so then I give a step-by-step thing. And in each of the books, I provide lesson plans, because it's one thing to say you need to have lesson plans, and another thing to be able to actually see lesson plans and see the step-by-step approach that you have to take. And
written by somebody who understands what you are going through.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really an important piece of that.
And it's really unfortunate that so many band directors think that they can wing it without having lesson plans. I know what I'm doing, and then they find themselves spending a whole lot of time on a certain issue, and notice that half the band is asleep half the orchestra is asleep because they're worried about this one section or this one note or this one phrase, and the rest of the kids don't have any idea what's going on. And so I talk about the importance of time management in the lesson plans, and also how to engage other students, because I talk about discipline problems in each of the groups coming about because students are bored. And if they're bored, they're going to find something to fill that gap. And it's going to be something that's going to be destructive in most cases, destructive and disruptive. So you have to address those. And so I talk about in each of the books how to avoid losing your class and how to avoid setting up problems that become disciplinary problems because you did not budget your time well, or you didn't plan well, or you didn't foresee the problem. So I talk about the importance of score study and being able to see what kinds of things each section of a group, whether it's band, jazz, or orchestra, has, so that while you're teaching the clarinets that this is a rhythm you need to know, you've discovered in your score study that the trombones and the trumpets and the saxophones have that same issue. So you can work with all of those sections on the one thing that you're trying to fix with this clarinet section or this trumpet section.
Yes. And again, that's the preparation of the score study and not the winging it on the podium.
Right.
Yeah. Well, before we come back and ask you another question or two, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, the Empowered Music Educator Academy, where they help busy band directors create successful programs, build supportive communities, and feel frickin' amazing by providing productivity and wellness tips that support professional longevity and a healthy life.
You're listening to the Band Director Boot Camp podcast, brought to you by the Empowered Music Educator Academy. At the Academy, we're dedicated to supporting busy band directors like you with practical productivity and wellness strategies. Whether it's through our books, coaching sessions, or GPTs designed specifically for band directors, we've got everything you need to lead a successful music program without burning out. Let us help you achieve excellence in your work without working around the clock.
All right, we're back with Ronald Kearns, author, teacher, clinician, and I'm picking his brain today about some of his books because he is band trained and has then, of course, like many of us, taught orchestra, jazz band, and out of our comfort zone kinds of things. And he's taking what you already know and helping you do those other jobs easier and more effectively. So he's bridging that gap for us. And that's such an important thing because so many of us are teaching in those other areas that we weren't really made comfortable to teach in yet. So, Ronald, as we get going here, do you have any other books coming up? Any other projects? Any stuff in the works?
Actually, I don't know. The way the second book came about, I had done quick reference for band directors, and it had several things that led to the other books that were going on. And I got a call one day from Oxford University Press about doing recording tips for music educators. And so I had not thought about doing that book. and it fell in my lap, and so I did it. And so I don't know, when I say I don't know whether I'm going to be doing another book, I really don't know, because I don't know if someone's going to contact me and say, hey, we need to have, we saw your book and we need to have a book that does such and such. And so if anybody's listening and they think they need a book done, I'm open. But as of now, I have nothing planned. My most recent book, Quick Reference by Guide for Band Directors Who Teach Jazz, came about because people knew that I was a jazz artist and a record producer, and said, hey, we need to have this for jazz educators. And so I had resisted doing a book on jazz because there's just so many books on teaching jazz or books on jazz out there that I was not very enthusiastic about doing that particular book. But then when I thought about the fact that if I did a book, Quick Reference to Band Directors Who Teach Orchestra, there's probably a need. And so the original plan for the book was to call it Quick Reference for Classically Trained Band Directors Who Teach Jazz. But that was such a long title, we chopped it down. But that's what it basically is, because there are so many band directors who go into schools and they find band and jazz and orchestra on their schedule, and they've only participated in band or they've only taught band. And so suddenly now they have to teach orchestra and teach jazz. And the same thing I said about orchestra, there's a language and a vocabulary that you have to use for teaching jazz that's different from teaching classical band groups and from teaching orchestra. And so it's very important to understand that the students need to hear you speak their language. And if you're going to be talking about arco and pizzicato, you need to know clearly in your mind what those things are. And once you start using terminology that orchestral students understand and that jazz students understand, then it helps build your credibility, and the kids will trust you because they'll know that you've taken out time to figure out what to do with their particular discipline.
Yeah. They know if you know, right? They can see right through that.
They know immediately. Yeah. I mean, they see, I used to tell people, kids can spot a fake 100 yards away. And once you have established that you are fake or you're trying to wing your way through it, they're not going to listen. And one thing that I learned, and we used to talk about it all the time, orchestra students and band students are totally different.
Yes, they are. Yes.
I mean, the only thing they have in common is they perform music.
Yes, I wasn't prepared for that. When you stop the orchestra, they stop and they're quiet, and it's like, oh my God, I better have something brilliant to say. I didn't know what to do with all that silence.
Exactly.
Well, this has been great to talk to you and to bring these books to light, because I know many of the directors that listen to this have multiple parts within a music discipline they're teaching, and so this can really make it be more productive in that. Hey, what do you already know, and how can we connect it to a different ensemble type, a little bit different thing? And so I'm really grateful that you were willing to come on here today, Ron, and share about your books. And folks, you can go on to Amazon and you can search him up there. That's what I did. And you can see all of his books and read the bio on him and find these resources. And maybe your music supervisor if you're a music supervisor out there, you might want to have a few of these in hand. So when you get some folks in, this could be a tool that they could use to better teach the students. So just putting that out there because that's what we're here for, sharing productivity and wellness tips. So thank you, Ron.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, and thank you to all you listeners out there who are making a difference in kids' lives through the magic of music education every single day. The work you do matters, and so do you. Join us next time on Band Director Boot Camp for another episode of productivity and wellness tips to make your life a little easier.